Welcome everyone to this new chapter of ESS2. Today we'll be talking about life and the biosphere, looking at the evolution of life on Earth and the interaction of the population, the individual, the species all together. And so you can see on this first slide a nice video I found from YouTube. You have the references. And this video illustrates the evolution of life over time, going to an expected end finish of a human being, since usually the topics related ESS2 concern a lot of human beings. So today, what is the main question that we will be looking at? We will be wondering what is the natural organization of life on Earth. And to answer that general question, we will look at three smaller topics. First, we'll be looking at how life has evolved over time through a brief overview of the geological scale of the Earth, of the timeline of the Earth, with a quick evolution of the Earth and looking at the major component of this evolution. Then, we'll be looking at population ecology, meaning that we will be looking at how the populations in general are growing and changing over time, and how do population and species interact between themselves and with the environment. Finally, to end today's chapter, we'll be talking about biological extinction. Quickly reviewing the major biological extinctions that the planet has lived through, and of course defining the concept, and finishing up with an opening on the next chapter, that will be chapter 5, that will be later on looking on the protection and the conservation of biodiversity. So let's look at the first point of today's chapter by looking at the evolution of life on the planet. And so we may in general think that maybe life hasn't been on the planet for quite a long time. In fact, first, what do you think is the age of the planet? Well, in general, it has been estimated between 4.5 to 4.6 billion years. At this point, take another guess, and over this about 5 seconds to come, write down on a piece of paper an estimate on since how long life has been on Earth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Life has been on Earth for about 3.8 billion years. So it's about 85% of all Earth history that possibly has been covered with life. And this is only based on the older fossils that we've been finding. So perhaps it's still even possible that life has been on Earth since longer than that. And honestly, life has been doing very great, has been blooming, diversifying itself, and all along, except mostly about the last 150,000 years, it has been doing it very nicely without our presence. Human has been on the planet since a few million years as hominoids, meaning that we were not just Homo sapiens as we are right now, but as we saw, our main impact on Earth started about 10,000 years before Christ, when we had our agricultural revolution and starting building cities. But before that, life was doing pretty great on Earth and has evolved differently. If we compare, this geological time sometimes might be a bit tricky to understand. So we can compare this about 4.5 billion years to a clock of 24 hours. And so how would it change, in fact, all of this timing thing if the age of the Earth was just rounded to 24 hours? Well, we have this schematic just in front of us at this point, with time 0, the creation of the planet. During the first 3-4 hours, we still have some heavy meteorites bombardment happening, creating the shape of the Earth colliding with a massive planetoid that was in fact the moon forming impact. Starting from that, if you want more details, either investigate on your own or come to ESS1. And then but about 8 a.m. of the morning, it's supposedly around that time that the first trace of life happened, at least was found. So again, possibly life has happened before that. And so you can see that after that, it took a long time for life to evolve. I mean, we're going from 8 a.m. to about 9 p.m. in the night. At this point, around 9 p.m., almost 9:30, the first fish appears. And then you keep going. I'm just taking a few examples. First dinosaurs appearing almost at 11 p.m. at night. First mammal a little bit after, at 10:56, so just before 11 p.m. Dinosaurs disappeared by 11:40, and humans, if we're interested into humans, well, we just appeared on the very last minute. So, I mean, we are just peanuts regarding the time we spend on the planet versus the age of the planet in itself. So, I mean, pretty long period of time. We usually in geology are marking those periods of time based on, in fact, geological event that has been defining those periods. So the first one would be what we are calling the Precambrian. Most of the planet history is, in fact, summarized into the Precambrian, going from the 4.5.6 billion years of the Earth age to about 500 million. So, I mean, it's a majority of the planet being covered by this period. At that time, I mean, not so many things, at least diverse, happened. We had the formation of the current atmosphere, we had the formation of an atmosphere happening, formation of the surface of the continents, degassing happening, lots of volcanic eruption happening. So it was kind of the stage where the planet starting forming. Then life, who already had started in very simple ways, started to evolve. And we, during what we call the Paleozoic, covering about between 300 to 400 million years, life has been developed, has evolved into more complex organisms. As we can see it on the picture, different aquatic life, starting also, we can also observe at this time, at the very late time, invasion in some way or conquest of the land surface on the outside part with vegetation. And then life has evolved to what we know from some movies you may recall at this point, like the dinosaurs. So that's a Mesozoic, going from about 250 million years to 66 million years, which is the extinction of the dinosaurs. And then, after 60,000 years, the extinction of the dinosaurs came into a major role, the mammals, dominating most of this world. Another movie you may know, Ice Age. Alright, and so the Cenozoic is the last period we know at this point. That's covered the 60 million years up to now, with in fact period of domination of the mammals, and on the very last moment, the apparition of human and domination of human on the planet in itself. So let's go back to the principle of life and defining what's life. In terms of biology, life is defined by a few specific characteristics. First, life is defined by cells in general that contain membrane. They have walls around them that make sure that all the content will be not escaping. Those cells have a specific metabolism, meaning that they have a functioning system that will use and produce energy and also use nutrients. They are usually also defined by the fact that there is a network working, functioning within them, meaning like connection between the different elements of the cells, or between the cells themselves later on. Also, one of the characteristics of life is reproduction. Those cells have to be able to reproduce. We have to be able to reproduce because, well, death is part of life, and so we are not eternal. We have to have prodigies for life to keep evolving. Emergence is another characteristic of life, meaning, by emergence meaning that we are resisting at some point, we are adapting to possible change, and that's also part of evolution, that sometimes there is a natural selection happening, eliminating those who are not adapting to a specific change, and making those adapting the new ones, the survival one. And finally, one last thing is cooperation, or colossal symbiosis, where some cells, for example, have, or some organisms such as us, in fact, we wouldn't be surviving, for example, without bacteria. And so there is some inner cooperation we are not aware of. That's part of our physiology, in which our life is depending on other cell systems. So quickly, we were speaking about emergence. In fact, one of the characteristics of the evolution of life is this three specific characteristic called emergence, which is again a way that will help possibly to adapt to some possible environmental change. Emergence is in fact the spontaneous appearance of a new characteristic in an organism. And it happened again at a system level, so meaning that usually you're speaking about a complex organism, that an emerging character will happen. And naturally, we don't have any ways to guess when an emergence will happen. That's totally a chaos at this point. There is no prediction. Similarly to emergence, there is along emergence, there is another property we can talk about. It's resilience. The capacity, instead of having an organism that will develop a new characteristic, resilience, it's a capacity to absorb some possible change, to adapt to a change by itself. At this point, the organism doesn't develop any new function, develop any new characteristic, but it's in fact remaining exactly the same. It's just showing adaptation to a new possible environmental change. So that's two characteristics of life. Just wanted to go quickly over. At this point, life is defined by a tree of life showing three main domains. Mostly those three domains can in fact be simplified into two, called the prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are very basic cells that do not contain a nucleus and do not contain any internal organelles. And within the prokaryotes, without going into more details, I refer to your biological class otherwise, within the prokaryotes we'll find the bacteria, and we will find what we call the archaea. Then we have more developed cells called eukaryotes, and they are all other kind of life. I'm showing you the difference between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. In this figure, you can see a eukaryote has a definitely more complex structure. First, for example, they have the mitochondria, which provide the energy, the engine, in fact, of the cell in itself. And research has shown that, in fact, eukaryotes might be coming from the possible merging, to make it simple, of prokaryotes together, explaining, in fact, why eukaryotes tend to be more complex. And within the eukaryotes, what we'll find will be what we call the protists. In fact, they are just algae, let's say, one of the main examples. We will find also plants, we'll find the animals, and to not forget, also, we'll find the fungi. So that's the organization of what we call the tree of life, the three main domains that would be the bacteria, the archaea, and eukaryotes in fact. But again, the bacteria and archaea can be assembled into the prokaryotes. Life, in fact, as I was just saying a little bit before, depends a lot on symbiosis. There is a lot of interconnection with life, and the evolution of cells would not have happened from eukaryote to prokaryote if there was not a symbiosis, so a work together between cells, possibly merging together, that gave, for example, for the eukaryote, the development of a mitochondria that was not there, that you will not find in the prokaryotes. We have other example of symbiosis. Plants have developed, in fact, a symbiosis with some specific cell that were able to do photosynthesis, and now the plants have developed chloroplast in the cell. Another symbiosis that we found in nature, lichens. Lichens, in fact, are the association of algae plus fungi together. Coral reefs would be algae plus anemones, and mycorrhizae would be roots plus fungi. So those are just examples that just to illustrate. I won't be asking those kind of details to you guys for just precision, but to illustrate that life has depended on evolution. This evolution has depended a lot on the symbiosis of the fact that cells and organisms have been in fact working closely all together. And again, as I was saying to you just a slide before, mitochondria, you see this from that figure, it's where you have the energy made for our cells. So because of this symbiosis and this networking between life, sometimes it's not very easy, in fact, to differentiate an individual from, in fact, a community of individuals. You have from that figure, in fact, the difference between what we call an organism, a population, and a community. So a population will be, in fact, a group of organisms. Meanwhile, the community would be a group of different species. Both population and species, I will define them in just a little bit in the next question. At this point, we have examples where, in fact, sometimes it's difficult to make a difference between an individual and a group of individuals at this point. Let's take an example with the trees, with the aspen clones. Those trees, in fact, are all identical and they are sharing the same root system in its way. And so when you see that, you have an impression to see all the same tree, but at the end, it's like just the same tree being replicated as a forest. The same with the fungus colony in this point. Are you looking at just one fungus, or are you looking at the group of fungus? How they develop the same system as the aspen clone, and so it's very tricky to differentiate between either a community or an organism. Which one are they? Bees, for example, also by being all interconnected, are all doing a job to defend and to protect and to build their homes, but they usually act like if they were just one organism together. So by their structure and interconnection, those insects make the question between individuals and community very interesting. Finally, the same with bacteria. In general, a bacteria doesn't work just by itself. It's usually interconnected with other ones. And so the separation between individual and community tend to be a bit tricky. Speaking about bacteria, they are the foundation of life. Why is that? Because they are the one at the beginning of the food chain. They are the primary producer in the most of the food in the food webs in the ecosystem that we found on the planet. So still some notion I will be talking to you about in the next part of this chapter: food web, food chain, ecosystem. But at this point, the bacteria offered a lot of the nutrients at the base of the food system of life, and they also are part of the end system of part, in which they are usually recycling some of the organic material back into nutrients. They are part also of controlling, in fact, the composition of the atmosphere. For example, some of the bacteria are able to take the nitrogen from the air and to convert it into nutrients. Some of the bacteria have been finding ways to do photosynthesis, which in fact has been incorporated into the plants, for example, and algae. And interestingly, their interconnection made those general bacteria very, very adaptable and with diverse function in nature. And as I was mentioning, some of those are specific to metabolize to take into them nitrogen, hydrogen sulfide that's come from the deep of the ocean at the margin of the tectonic plates, for example, and taking these very toxic elements and turn them into nutrients. Interestingly, we found bacteria almost everywhere on the planet. Some are found below freezing point, some are found above boiling temperature, thing that we normally couldn't imagine for life in itself. So see, life in general are based on these bacteria, but after we had a huge evolution of life with the tree of life I showed you before. So in terms of life on the planet has a huge diversity. We call that in fact the biodiversity, representing the variety of life on the planet Earth. And with this picture, with this figure, you just have a few pictures on only some species. At this point, we estimate that about 10 to 14 million species are found on the planet. It's an estimation, because at this point, interestingly, we only knew probably about 2 million. So the interesting point is to think that we know about maybe 20% really of life on the planet. And some of them we are, for example, destroying it by our activities without even knowing that they exist. So we might in fact kill some species without knowing that. This biodiversity is in fact, as it says, a variety of life, and we can define it in 3 different ways depending on the scale you're looking at life. If you're looking at life in the very small scale, micro scale, you will be speaking about genes, and so DNA, genes, and you will be speaking about genetic diversity. When you can see from this figure, some DNAs will be the most elemental structure carrying the information of life, and the assembling of DNA will create you a gene. This gene will be at the formation of what we call protein, which will assure, in fact, the functioning of the organism. Each different proteins, have different function for the organism, and so by looking at the genetic diversity, we're interested at looking at the variety of the gene within the same organism in itself, or with different organisms. And so genetic diversity is an example. One of the examples of genetic diversity would be, for example, dogs. Dogs can be looking at so many ways different, but they are still all dogs. You can have small ones, big ones, Chihuahuas. You can have Doberman, you can have German Shepherd. They all are dogs, while they are looking differently because of genetic diversity. Another biodiversity component will be what we call species diversity, which is just the variety of species on the planet. So easily you can make a difference between an elephant, a bear, a giraffe, a human, a bird, any kind of a specific species of bird, a dolphin, etc., etc. So that's species diversity. Finally, we talk also about ecological diversity, and we will talk about ecosystem on the next during our next lecture. But the ecological diversity refer to the variety of environment on the planet, with different type of vegetation, different type of soil, different type of species, and different type usually of climates. This biodiversity is in fact a consequence of the emergence of life and its evolution. And so evolution has been shown as by the fact that life has changed over time. And that type of change has happened through what we call natural selection. The fact that over time some species has evolved, has developed, some others have disappeared. And so a natural selection happens just by naturally selecting the species who were able to survive an environment that was going to change over time. And you have example of those change. For example, with the Simpson creating Homer Simpson, or seed with the Ice Age, also the evolution of a possible seed. Okay, so that's what I had to say about life in itself. For more philosophical question, let's refer to our next class at this point if you want to. I'll let you take a break, and we'll go for a second point on population ecology whenever you're ready by clicking on the next video. See you in a bit.